From the towering Wasatch Mountains of the American Southwest, we welcome you to the next episode of Undiscovered Utah. This show focuses on the mysteries that surround the rugged, difficult, and sometimes deadly American Southwest. I'm your host, JB, and tonight we're talking about the unidentified aerial phenomenon and the unidentified flying objects in and around Utah and the Southwest United States. Let me tell you something. For years, people living in Utah have been seeing and reporting strange lights in the skies over Utah. But what does strange lights mean? If I am out in the dark Utah desert and all of a sudden I see a bright light off in the distance, it is stationary and elevated above the ground. No flashing lights can be seen. Is this a UAP or a UFO? Well, we don't know. It could be a young couple that has found a quiet place on top of a hill to park and enjoy each other's company. And they were so eager to start that activity that the driver forgot to turn off the headlights of his car. It is true that sometimes we see what we want to see. Whatever has been or what is currently on our mind can certainly cloud our perception of the environment around us. Let me tell you a story that happened to my wife and I many years ago. As I have stated in many of the previous episodes of this podcast, I love to travel all around Utah. My wife and I have always enjoyed camping. Before we had children, we embarked on a trip to Moab, Utah area, and then down to Cedar Mesa. We camped a few nights along the Colorado River north of Moab and enjoyed visiting Arches National Park, Canyonlands National Park, Dead Horse Point State Park, and many spots along the Potash Road, and even a trip up into the La Salle Mountains. We were having a great time, just the two of us and our Siberian Husky. After a few days, we left Moab behind and headed further south into San Juan County, down Highway 191. Just past the town of Blanding, Utah, we turned west onto Highway 95. This is when the mood of our trip started to change. At the time, this was new area to us. Our planned destination for that night was Natural Bridges National Monument. Back in the early 90s, you could drive all day on this stretch of road and not see another car. The road was paved, but still quite remote. We arrived at Natural Bridges National Monument and went inside the visitor center. We came to find out that the campground only had 14 camping spots and was full for the night. They told us that there was a quote-unquote overflow camping area near the intersection of Highway 95 and 261. As it turned out, the overflow camping area was just a big gravel lot surrounded by juniper trees on top of a mesa. There were no other campers in this location. We had it all to ourselves. We got our camp set up and decided we still had some daylight left, so we would drive back to Natural Bridges National Monument and see the sights. When we arrived, we went back into the visitor center. There, we met two other couples that were visiting the States from Germany. The ranger at the visitor center told us that the gates to the park closed at 10 p.m., and that if we were still in the park at 10 p.m., we would have to spend the night in the park. Neither us nor the couples from Germany wanted to sleep in our cars in the park. By this time it was almost 8 p.m., but it didn't get dark until about 9 or 9:30 p.m. So we had about an hour and a half if we wanted to drive the loop around the park and see some of the sights. The couples from Germany asked us if we were going to attempt to drive the loop and see the sights that night. We told them yes, we would try. They asked if they could drive along with us. Of course, we told them yes, and we all loaded into the cars. The two couples from Germany were traveling together in a mid-sized car. We drove to each pullout and looked at the natural bridges from the viewpoints. The scenery was spectacular. We could see hikers down under the bridges, and it looked like a lot of fun, but we didn't have time to do any hikes, at least not on this day. We were playing leapfrog with the couples from Germany, and soon it became kind of funny as we would wave to each other as we walked to and from the viewpoints. They were very nice people, and it made the hurried trip through the park a very enjoyable one. The folks from Germany left the park right ahead of us. At about 9:50 p.m., we had just made it out of the park in time before they closed the gates for the night. We had about a 10 to 15-minute drive back to the overflow camping area where we had set up our camp. It was very dark on this night as there were no lights of any kind after you left the park. The only lights that we could see were the taillights on the car from the German couples and our own headlights. The road was a somewhat winding road with a lot of big dips where you would drive through the washes. We would see the German couples' taillights for a few seconds until they went around the next curve or into a dip. They were about 150 yards ahead of us. All of a sudden, the sky lit up like it was noonday. My wife and I saw what looked like a huge fireball flying over our car and towards the Bears Ears Mountain. To the east of our location was the Bears Ears Mountain. The mountain has two rounded peaks that look like matching bear's ears, and this is where the name of the Bears Ears National Monument comes from. I instinctively pressed on my brakes as I thought for sure whatever it was going to hit the Bears Ears Mountain, and there would be a huge explosion. As fast as the entire area was as bright as daytime, it went back to being pitch black, with only our headlights as a source of illumination. "What the heck was that?" I asked my wife. Her reply was an unsettled, "I don't know." There was no explosion. There was nothing. Just darkness. Even though I had pressed my brakes, I had not come to a stop. Not even close, as the entire event only lasted a couple of seconds. But here's the odd thing. We never saw the taillights on the car with the couples from Germany again. Even on the longer straightaways, there was nothing. Where did they go? Even if they would have hit their gas when I pressed my brakes, they wouldn't have been that far ahead of us. We thought that maybe they had run off the road, but we looked and there was no evidence of that either. When we got back to our camp, we were a little weirded out, to say the least. What had just happened? Was it a meteor that had entered Earth's atmosphere? It seemed so low, and it was so big and bright. This was not a typical falling star. A few days later, after we had finished our trip, I looked through the news to see if anything had been reported. nothing. We have no idea what we saw that night, and there were a few strange things that happened on our trip after that. Had we seen a UFO? Not a spaceship, but a UFO. We definitely saw a UAP. What's the difference between a UFO and a UAP? UFO stands for Unidentified Flying Object. This term and acronym became a household term during the days of Project Blue Book. UAP, on the other hand, is a much more recent term that stands for Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. Since the 1950s, if you have seen a UFO and reported it, much like reporting a Bigfoot, you must be a real nutcase. Flying saucers, aliens, and the like do not exist, period. End of conversation. It had become commonplace that if a pilot saw something that they couldn't identify up in the sky with them, they would radio into flight control, and flight control would look at the radar to see if anything was showing up on radar, and then they would ask the pilot if they wanted to log a report. Almost every time the pilot would decline to avoid being made fun of and other forms of harassment. Same held true for military personnel and even law enforcement. No one was going to make an official report and become that guy or that gal. It was far less hassle just to keep your mouth shut and wonder the rest of your life what it was you saw. The general public had a little more leniency with the topic, but even there, most people would just raise an eyebrow, smile, and walk away as fast as they could. When H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds book was turned into a radio drama in 1938, here in the United States, it scared half the nation into thinking it was real news broadcast that was actually happening. Hollywood realized what a moneymaker alien shows could be, and from Buck Rogers to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, America and the rest of the world became big fans of outer space. But this was just entertainment. It wasn't real life. Then, in 1947, we had the Roswell incident. On July 8th, the Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release. The headline on the Roswell Daily Record read, RAFF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Now, the RAFF made the press release all by themselves. But it didn't take long for the Army to quickly issue a retraction, saying that it was not a flying disc. It was only a conventional weather balloon. Then in 1970, Colonel Jesse Marcel, in an interview, stated that he believed that the debris he retrieved was extraterrestrial. UFOs now had the potential to be real things. The U.S. Air Force had started a program with the code name of Project Sign in 1947, the same year as the Roswell weather balloon crash. And then another project code named Project Blue Book just a few years later in 1952. Project Blue Book ran until 1969 and was terminated. End of story. UFOs are not real again. Stop thinking they are. You will quickly be labeled as a conspiracy theorist if you believe that UFOs are real. Now, back to Utah and its UFO history. Trivia question. When was the first UFO reported within the boundaries of the state of Utah? Anyone? The year was 1776. Father Escalante wrote about seeing a fireball in the sky. Utah is actually at the center of a lot of UFO discussions today. Why? Let me tell you about an area some people say is the new Area 51. About 40 miles southwest of Lehi, Utah, is an area called the Dugway Proving Grounds. This is a U.S. Army facility that was created in 1942. The purpose of the facility was to test biological and chemical weapons. Of course, due to the prevailing winds that blow from west to east, that could make the entire population of the Wasatch Front test subjects. Wait, that's where I live. Oh, I'm sure the government would never do anything that would put its citizens at risk. Yeah, right. It's been 82 years since Dugway was created, and it is still a very active military base with very heavy security. It is a huge base that takes up well over 800,000 acres, or 1,252 square miles. That's about the same size as all of Rhode Island. The Dugway Proving Grounds are just south of another U.S. military site called the Utah Test and Training Range. This site takes up 2,642 square miles. Why is this significant? Well, these two sites make up the largest block of overland continuous special use airspace within the continental U.S. It is a massive area of land when you combine the two sites. What can and what does the military do with all that land? Some think it's more than what is advertised. And what's advertised is still scary as hell. I mean, chemical and biological weapon testing? That alone should scare anyone away from that area. But maybe that's the point. Keep people away from the advertised mission of the facility and possibly the unadvertised secret mission of the facility. In the Dugway area, there have been a lot of UFO sightings reported over the 82 years. Many people have also reported seeing a huge green laser-like light shooting up into the sky that can be seen as far away as the Bench in Salt Lake City. If true, that is one big and bright light. These same people also report seeing smaller lights or orbs flying around the big green beam of light. A popular TV show called UFO Hunters that aired on the History Channel did a full episode on Dugway in Season 2, Episode 24, called Area 52. Another TV show called UFO Uncovering the Truth on the Travel Channel did a show again called Area 52. This was their Season 1, Episode 1. Dugway, Utah is definitely big news in the UFO community. But it isn't the only or biggest UFO news story in Utah, but we will get to that in a minute. Let me share with you some of the reported sightings that have taken place in Utah, and then I will tell you of another possible sighting yours truly had many years ago. The following story came from an article in the Deseret News. Paul Peterson, Immigration Canyon, 1964. Huge oval craft seen early one morning. It drifted over and down and then hovered above the driveway, Peterson said. As it stood still, people inside came to the portholes and looked out at me. That kind of unnerved me because it was so dark and I knew I couldn't be seen by human eyes. They looked just like people. They were silhouetted against a green light in the background. Peterson then received a telepathic message from the beings. They asked if he would like to come with them. It was one individual's voice, he said. I didn't say anything, but answered by thinking. My thought was that I can't leave. I have a wife and 2 children who depend on me. Their response was, that's okay. And the craft just hovered up above the trees and went over the mountain behind me. Okay, no little green men in this story, not even grays, but human-looking figures. Extraterrestrial or military? But it was so long ago. Are there any more recent reports? There have been 34 sightings reported to the National UFO Reporting Center in 2022 so far. Many of these reported sightings have either photos or videos to document the sighting. October 1st, 2022, 11 p.m., Delta, Utah. I was looking up at the stars and I noticed some very dimly illuminated objects appear in the eastern sky. They were moving westward in a very tight V formation. The formation was probably half that of the diameter of the moon. I estimate that there were 5 objects formed tightly together. I had a clear view of most of the sky, and these objects crossed east to west almost directly overhead, and maybe 2 seconds and out of view. There was no sound which accompanied the object. Because they were dimly illuminated and moving fast, I couldn't determine how far away the objects were. They were moving too fast to be satellites, too silent to be low-flying jets. I don't think they were birds or bats because of both speed and lack of wing movement. September 17th, 2022, 1:40 p.m., Provo, Utah. While we were sitting on a rocky bluff taking in the scenery, I happened to notice a bright, shiny object against the deep blue sky. At first, I thought it was simply an airplane, but as I watched it for several more seconds, I noticed that there was no movement. It was totally suspended in the sky. I'd say 2,000 to 2,500 feet in the air, about 3 miles away. To be sure it wasn't moving, I put my thumb up directly under it and watched to see if it went up or down or left or right of my thumb. It did not move. It was hovering in place against a ridiculously strong winds blowing from south to north. I watched this strange hovering behavior for approximately 2 to 3 minutes. About a minute after I began watching this object, I said to my wife, Connie, check that out. There's a UFO there. I said it half joking, but in my mind there was no other logical explanation. I guess I was looking for some confirmation that what I was seeing was actually happening. We watched it together for another minute or so while it was hovering in place, both of us entirely perplexed. Connie even said to me, "That is really, really weird." Shortly after she said that, the object began to descend rapidly, in a controlled manner, down and to the left, from south to north, into the strong wind. I quickly grabbed her phone and started recording a video. I couldn't actually see the object on the phone because it was so far away, but I tracked it with my eyes while I moved the phone downward where I thought the object would remain visible in the frame. I lost the object with my eyes and the phone when it dropped to the same level as the mountains. That's why the video ends abruptly. I thought it was gone, but it wasn't. We got a visual on the object again about a minute later. It was hovering just above the treetops in front of a distant mountain, kind of fading in and out of visibility. Then it disappeared. Poof, gone. As stated in the above story, there was video and still frames captured from the video that show a perfectly round orb. September 6th, 2022, 7:10 p.m., Price, Utah. UFO sighting by 2 fifth graders. Large, square-shaped, erratic movements in evening sky above Price, Utah. My son and his friend were riding their bikes near a local church. My son's friend said, "Look at that. It's like a big square darting around." They were really excited and chased on their bikes, trying to get a good shot and video. They stopped and snapped a photo. Then my son called me excited at 7:17 from the friend's phone to report what they saw. The friend sent me a photo, and I was so shocked to see it. I asked my son to draw the movements of the craft and asked his friend to also draw a diagram of how the craft moved. The friend also sent me a video from his phone as well as a close-up photo. I have not included the friend's name or contact, but advised the parents that they will likely receive a call from possibly Mr. Davenport, as I did today. I had called on the hotline last night and left a message. The friend recalled that it may have shifted color from dark purple to black. He doesn't think it made any sound, but wasn't sure. During my questioning of this report, the friend said that a helicopter had passed overhead a couple of minutes before the sighting. It was headed west to east. This report had some perplexing photos with it. It looks as though a pixel is missing from the sky. Really odd. The reports on the website, they go on and on and on. As I read through them, I form my own opinions of how credible the story sounds to me based on how well the story is told and the amount of detail shared, and the likelihood of someone making up a particular story. One of the complaints I hear over and over again is that there is never any hard evidence, just tall tales. Well, go check out the photos on the National UFO Reporting Center website. A few weeks ago, we did an episode of Bigfoot in Utah. Let me tell you, there are a lot more reports of UFOs in Utah than Sasquatches, and there are a lot of reported sightings of Sasquatches. I said in that episode that I'd never seen a Bigfoot, and I still haven't, but I have seen a UFO. My sighting took place in Provo, Utah in the late 1980s or early 1990s. I was going to college and working nights at a local grocery store called Food for Less. The store was open 24 hours a day. Every day we would receive big shipments of freight, and at night we would restock the shelves when the store was least busy. It was crazy how much food and other goods were sold in that store every day of the week. My shift started at 9 p.m. and went until the store was fully stocked and faced, usually until about 6 or 7 in the morning the next day. There was usually a crew of about a half a dozen to a dozen of us working each night. I remember it was winter time and cold outside, and I needed to stack some pallets out behind the store. It would have been in the early morning as we would have started the cleanup from our night of restocking. It was still very dark outside, and I remember it was a very clear night. I carried the pallets off the loading dock and stacked them in a pile just off the road that went behind the back of the store. As I would walk back to the loading dock, I would look up at the night sky. It was pretty, but like I said before, it was cold and I didn't have a coat on. After I stacked the last pallet, I climbed up the stairs onto the loading dock, and I stopped one more time to look at the night sky. That's when I saw it. It was a very large black triangle moving very slowly to the north. As it passed above me, the stars in the night sky were disappearing behind this huge object. As I remember it, there were a few solid white lights along the edge of the craft, but none were blinking, and none were overly bright. There was absolutely no sound at all. This was not a fast-moving object. My guess is it was traveling about 30 to 40 miles per hour. No one else was outside with me, and I have to be honest, I didn't tell anyone. Not for a long time. I told myself that it had to be something like a B-2 stealth bomber, but there were a few problems with that theory. Whatever it was flying very low and very slow with no sound. I know a B-2 is stealth, but that's to radar. It still makes a lot of noise. The Provo airport is about a 20-minute drive from where I saw the object, and this was not a normal area to see any air traffic on any day or night. So what was it? Well, for me, it was an unidentified flying object. To this day, I have no idea what I saw that night, and as far as I know, I was never probed. So let's talk about another area in Utah that has been well known to locals but largely undiscovered to most people living outside the state. That is until the History Channel started a series called The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. Today, this area is known worldwide. Skinwalker Ranch is located in the Uinta Basin near the town of Fort Duchesne. Now, there is another larger town called Duchesne that is about 35 miles down the road. Don't get the two confused. The location called Skinwalker Ranch is not a spooky-looking place. It is actually very pretty. It is a very green landscape due to the many streams that run through the area. It's the perfect place to raise livestock. On the northern end of the ranch is a sandstone mesa that gives the ranch a very rustic look and feel. It would be a great place to film an old western. So why does the History Channel have a TV series about this ranch in eastern Utah of all places? Before we answer that question, let's talk about the name of the ranch. Skinwalker Ranch. Why is it called Skinwalker Ranch? What is a skinwalker? Well, to really understand what a skinwalker is, we have to travel to the Four Corners area of Utah onto the Navajo reservation. Here is where the term skinwalker comes from. Well, sort of. In the Navajo language, it is called Yi Notlushi. When translated literally means, by means of it, it goes on all fours. This is a very evil entity to the Navajo. It is an evil witch that can change into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. Witches and or skinwalkers are the opposite of a medicine man or woman. Medicine men try to help, to heal, to bestow positive energies. Skinwalkers, on the other hand, try to deceive, scare, harm, or kill. So why is a ranch in northeastern Utah called Skinwalker Ranch? It's not a name you would choose to install feelings of peace, harmony, and love, that's for sure. And the ranch is about 300 miles away from the Navajo Nation. The story goes that the Ute tribe got into the slavery business and would send out raiding parties to other tribes to steal food, horses, and other goods like people. Then they would sell these other tribal members to the Spanish or anyone else traveling through the area. Needless to say, this didn't sit too well with the Navajo tribe. After all, the Utes were kidnapping their children and selling them into slavery. How would you feel if that happened to your family? What length would you go to stop this evil act? Apparently, one or more Navajos got mad enough to use evil magic to stop the Utes. They cursed the Utes with skinwalkers. Now, the Utes lived around Fort Duchesne in the Uinta Basin area. Fort Duchesne was a fort established by the U.S. Army in 1886 in the middle of the Ute Reservation that was established in 1864. Settlers moved into the area just off the reservation boundaries near the fort. The Army abandoned the fort in 1912, and with the fort being within the boundaries of the Ute Reservation, it was reused to create a small community, and that small community kept the name of the fort. Skinwalker Ranch is a stone's throw away from Fort Duchesne and borders the Ute Reservation. Before the ranch was called Skinwalker Ranch, it was called the Sherman Ranch. The Shermans purchased this beautiful ranch for an excellent price from the previous owners. They were very excited to start their cattle business. But apparently, it didn't take long after moving to the ranch for them to notice there was something wrong with this place. Something almost evil. The Shermans tried to make a living ranching, but the ranch wasn't cooperating. The family was tormented by all kinds of crazy things, like a huge wolf that they shot with a high-powered rifle and saw flesh fly off the body, but it didn't faze the wolf at all. Or like their cows being found dead, mutilated, with no blood. Poltergeists, and the list goes on, including UFOs, and a lot of them. It's not just above Skinwalker Ranch that UFOs are seen and reported. It's all over the Uinta Basin. Sheriffs, school teachers, scientists, doctors, housewives, skids, all reporting UFO sightings in the basin. Some call the basin UFO Alley. The History Channel's TV series, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, is attempting to document all the odd happenings at the ranch and in the basin, including all the UFO or UAP sightings. If you haven't seen the show, I highly recommend you do. They have caught some amazing videos that just can't be explained. A word of caution. This show could be unsettling for many. Use good judgment before watching it with the whole family. Utah. Who knew that the U in UFO and UAP stood for Utah? Well, I don't know what they are. I don't know who they are. I don't know why they are. I don't know if they're good or bad or both. But I believe that they are out there, and they are still largely undiscovered. If you would like more information about UFOs and UAPs in Utah, or any of our other podcasts, you can email me at info@undiscoveredutah.com. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of Undiscovered Utah. Join me next week as I share more about the Great Southwest. Good night, everybody.